So, whether you're studying project management, computer science, or even business, there's one topic that's going to follow you pretty much your entire career: managing money. Today, we're going to break down project cost management. I know it sounds a little dry, but trust me, this is where projects either live or die. And in the IT world especially, keeping costs from spiraling out of control is a huge, huge challenge. Okay, let's just dive right in with a number that should really get your attention: 27%. So, what's that? Well, according to a study in the Harvard Business Review, that's the average cost overrun on IT projects. Think about that. On average, a project that was supposed to cost $1 million actually winds up costing $1,270,000. And that's just the average. The study also pointed out that tons of projects get hit by what they call black swan events. These are rare, totally unpredictable problems that just cause budgets to explode in ways nobody ever saw coming. So, how do we stop this from happening? Well, that's what this whole explainer is about. First, we're going to look at why costs go wrong in the first place. Then, we'll walk through the official four-step process for managing them. After that, we'll dig into the nitty-gritty of estimating and budgeting. And then, we'll cover this really powerful technique called earned value management. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with the core principles you absolutely need for success. Right. Let's start with the problem itself, because, before you can fix something, you gotta understand why it's breaking. The official term for when a project goes over budget is a cost overrun. It's really just the gap between what you planned to spend and what you actually spent. Now, these overruns can happen for a million reasons, right? Maybe the first estimates were just way too optimistic, or the scope of the project changed halfway through, or maybe you get hit by one of those black swan events we just talked about, like a key piece of software suddenly becoming obsolete. The whole point of cost management is to make that gap as tiny as possible. So to fight these overruns, we don't just, hope for the best. We use a structured system called project cost management. It's a formal process that's designed to make sure a project actually gets finished within its approved budget. And that whole framework is built on these four key processes. First, you plan how you're even going to manage costs, right from the very beginning. Second, you estimate the cost for all the resources you're going to need. Third, you use those estimates to determine the budget. And finally, and this is so crucial, you actively control the costs while the project is happening, constantly monitoring and adjusting as you go. You can really think of it as your financial roadmap for the entire project. Okay, so let's get into the practical side of this. How do we actually come up with the numbers that go into our budget? Now, what's really interesting here is that estimation isn't just a one-time guess. It's a process. It gets more refined over time. So at the very beginning, you might do what's called a rough order of magnitude estimate, or a ROM. And as you can see, its accuracy is, well, it's terrible. It could be off by as much as 100%, but it's good enough to help you decide if a project is even worth looking into. Then, as you learn more, you develop a much better budgetary estimate. And finally, you get to a super precise, definitive estimate that you'll use to actually manage the project. So how do you actually create these estimates? Well, there are two main ways to go about it. Analogous, or top-down, is the fast way. You just look at a similar project you did in the past and say, hey, this new one is kind of the same, so it'll probably cost about the same. It's great for those early, rough estimates. But bottom-up is the complete opposite. You break the entire project down into the tiniest possible tasks, you estimate each one individually, and then you add them all up. Yeah, it's slow and it's a ton of work, but it's how you get to that really, really accurate, definitive estimate. Now, as you're building your budget, you've got to think about costs in a few different ways. For instance, there are direct costs, like paying the salaries of your project team, versus indirect costs, like the rent for the office building. Some costs are tangible. You can easily slap a dollar amount on them. But other costs are intangible, like a drop in your team's morale after a big setback. It's also so important to ignore sunk costs. That's money you've already spent. It's gone. Don't let it influence your future decisions. And finally, any smart budget is going to have safety nets called reserves. Contingency reserves for the risks you can kind of see coming, the known unknowns, and management reserves for those totally unpredictable unknown unknowns. Okay, so you've planned, you've estimated, and you've set your budget. Now for the hardest part, actually controlling the costs while the project is happening. And for this, we have an incredibly powerful tool called Earned Value Management, or EVM. EVM is built on three main numbers. The first is planned value, or PV. This is simply your baseline. It's the approved budget for the work that is scheduled to be done by a specific date. So you can think of it as asking, according to our plan, how much money were we supposed to have spent by now?
The second number is the easy one, actual cost, or AC. This is just the total amount of money that has actually been spent to get the work done so far. There's no mystery here, it's just the total of all the bills you've paid.
And that brings us to the most important metric of them all, earned value, or EV. Honestly, this is the key concept in all of EVM. It measures the value of the work you've actually completed, but it's expressed in terms of its original budgeted cost. For instance, if you finished half of a task that was budgeted for $10,000, your earned value is $5,000. It doesn't matter how much you actually spent to get to that halfway point. So by comparing these three values, PV, AC, and EV, we can calculate the health of our project at any given moment. The cost variance tells us if we're over or under budget. The schedule variance tells us if we're ahead or behind schedule. And then these performance indexes, CPI and SPI, they give us an efficiency rating. A cost performance index of less than 1 means you are getting less value than you're paying for. And that is a major, major red flag. And this chart illustrates perfectly how it all comes together. So this chart shows a project after 5 months. The solid red line, that's the plan, our planned value. The dotted green line is our actual cost, what we've spent. And the dashed purple line is our earned value, the value of the work we finished. You can see the problem right away, can't you? That green actual cost line is way above the purple earned value line. That gap means we are spending more money than the value of the work we are producing. We are officially over budget. All right, we have covered a lot of technical ground. So for this last section, let's just boil it all down to the key principles you really need to succeed. Here is your toolkit for success. First, always remember that executives understand financial terms better than technical jargon, so learn to speak their language. Second, you have to know that we humans are just naturally optimistic when we estimate. Always challenge your own assumptions and build in those reserves. Your main goal is to create that cost baseline, that time-phased budget we saw in the EVM chart, so you have a yardstick to measure performance against. Use software to track everything, meticulously. And finally, if you see that cost or schedule performance index drop below 1, you know you have a problem that needs your attention right now. So, let's end with a little question to get you thinking. Imagine you're managing a project and you run the numbers, your CPI is 0.85. Now we know that anything less than 1 is a problem. This number is telling you that for every single dollar you spend, you're only getting 85 cents worth of work done. So the question is, what is the very first thing you do after you see that number? That's the real challenge of project cost management. It's not just about calculating the numbers, it's about knowing how to act on them.